Hello, everybody. So we're up to module 6 now of 8. We're getting very near the end. We've seen a bunch of things. Kind of started with hardware, that survey aspect of this course, right? Take a very quick preview of all the different programs for School of IT. Works out nicely because there are 8 modules and 7 programs in School of IT. So we can kind of preview each one of them. We start with hardware and talk about data, the stuff we want to keep on that hardware, and then software, actually manipulating that data and turning it from machine form into human form so that we can do stuff with it. Then we looked at networking so that we can transmit it. Did I skip one? I think that was all of them. And a very important part of that is we need to secure that. We don't want it to be not all data needs to be available to everybody. So things with cybersecurity. I think everybody has heard that word before, so we don't necessarily need the definition. I do have it written on this paper: state of being protected against criminal or unauthorized use. State of being protected against criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data and the measures taken to achieve this. I think everybody knows what cybersecurity is in our world, though. But I want to just read off that definition here at the intro before we get into the announcements, because it's Cybersecurity Week. We can do a lot of things. We can talk about the triad at the beginning, and there's always a trade-off. We want to do one thing, right? To add this one thing, we have to take away from something else. Things have to balance off. So we'll talk about the trade-off and different things. A big part of cybersecurity, though, is educating people, because you can automate a lot of processes and things like that, but for the traditional example, no matter how secure your system is, your network is, what happens when Bob over in one of the cubicles on the 3rd floor gets an email from a Nigerian prince offering him money? If he enters that, then all of your efforts for cybersecurity are in vain. So a big part of cybersecurity is educating other people. And part of that is terminology, vocabulary, things like that. So this week is almost entirely definitions. Lots and lots and lots of definitions at lecture. But before we get to that, I did want to talk about one thing. The discussion board from last week is about graphical representation of data. Very important thing, right? Nobody wants to read that table in a spreadsheet. Or I could do it as an example. Let me share my screen and I'll find the spreadsheets real quick. Our data looks something like this. Salary, 1, 2, 3, 89, Jimmy, 241, Sarah, 38, Dylan, something like that. And that's what our data looks like. Nobody wants to read those tables, and that's a minimal example of it. We're usually talking about lots and lots of columns and lots of things. So we want to make that look a little bit nicer. Spreadsheets are a good way to do this. Those have already done this. Well, this was an assignment a couple weeks ago. We can go hit the chart button. By default, it turns it into Google Sheets. Looked at that and decided, okay, this looks like data that should be in a pie chart. Pie charts are for when everything adds up to 100%, and we're looking at it as a percentage of that whole. Lots of different charts, the bars, lines, charts with multiple lines. That doesn't really work with this data. Not all of our data will work in all of the things. Oh, I did say that wrong a second ago. Most people say this one wrong. Columns go vertically and bars go horizontally, but most people call a column chart a bar chart. Bars are the ones that go horizontal. Lots of other interesting ones. I don't think the bubble's going to show. Scatter plot, which doesn't really mean much at this point. That's just plotting the individual points. Those scatter plots are a lot more meaningful if both axes are a variable. That shows up a lot in statistics. We see them they're often introduced in math classes where we have our x-axis, the one that changes at the bottom, and then the y is held constant. But we get a lot more meaning out of a scatter plot if both of those axes are variable. So like in a controlled experiment where there's more than one variable that we're testing. So like in medicine, not just the medicine versus placebo, but medicine and placebo on one axis, and then smoker, non-smoker on the other axis. And then there's a lot more information in scatter plots. When they get introduced in algebra classes, they're those other things. Bubble charts require at least 3 axes. A bubble chart is like a scatter plot, only it has the third axis coming out. So we see things bigger or smaller instead of the same size dot everywhere, depending on whether they should really be like in front of the screen or behind the screen. A way to consolidate that. Little gauges can be useful in different situations. 5-column ones, obviously I don't have 5 columns. That's the five number summary. They have a box with little dashes drawn off of them. It has the highest value, the lowest value, the middle 50%. So it kind of consolidates a lot of the information that we want from a bell curve, only in a smaller shape so that we can do several of them side by side. Lots of different types of plots, spider webs. Hard to make any sense out of the data on a spider, on that random data I just made up out of the spider plot. But everyone has its purpose. That was kind of what the discussion board was. Everybody responded to it. But there's another aspect to it that I put a lot of thought into when that was assigned as the fifth module 5 discussion board, and is due right around the time we're starting module 6 on cybersecurity. Because there's another side to that. We're talking about visual things. People are very much a visual species, and we can, when we put our data into graphical representation form, we can have a lot of influence over the people that will be looking at that data. There's quite a few things. Color theory is a popular one. Has everybody heard of color theory before? Fast food restaurants have definitely taken advantage of that, almost to the point that some people have accused them of manipulating it. I'll go ahead and throw that word out here, and why I like to talk about this in cybersecurity week. It's kind of like the ethical hacking class the cybersecurity people have to take. Right? Just imparting the knowledge here, not saying to do this or right. Doing this or not doing this is completely on you. But based on how we make the chart look, we can manipulate people, manipulate how they perceive the data. Right? If there's something that, if you have data that you're going to have to show people that doesn't really support the side that you want, the decisions that you want the company to make or something, right? Maybe there's a big debate on which direction the business you work for is moving, and people want to bring in data to support it. And nobody wants to read those tables and charts. And you definitely don't want to lie about what the results of the data are. But like if you don't support that, you can make the chart look really, really bad. Right? Have the data that doesn't support your side and just a very stripped down basic chart, terrible color schemes like orange and green, or hot pink and yellow on and bad colors, and then another chart that right near it or on the next slide in the slide deck that has like a bunch of 3D features and shadows and shiny colors and looks super nice. People are automatically going to take to that super nice looking chart better. And we can manipulate people that way, manipulate their responses. Not saying to do that or not, just imparting the knowledge, it is possible. And other things like the fast food. It's well known that the colors red and yellow make humans hungrier. I don't know if anybody's ever come up with a thorough explanation as to why that happens, but we know it happens, and that's why all the fast food places use red and yellow in their signs, and why it has occasionally reached the point that people have even used the word manipulation towards them when they talk about some of the health crises in America and how they used color theory to make people hungrier whenever they saw the restaurant. If you're presenting data at a meeting right before lunch, or you know the meeting's going to happen right before lunch, everybody's going to be really hungry, and you want people to accept the data, even if it's not very good data, put a bunch of reds and yellows on that chart, and it's going to look more appealing because they're all hungry at an 11:30 meeting or something. We can get that sort of influence. There's a lot of things on there. If you want to get into details, graphic designers were subtle about how they put information about it on the web. So they usually do put it in compare and contrast form. They'll say good form, bad form, and if you look at the pictures, it won't necessarily look bad right off the bat, but those are the color patterns of how you can manipulate people. Probably should have prepared the search here. I haven't done it since the last time I taught the course. Good versus bad charts. So this one probably has it. Let's see what this is. Good and bad examples of data visualization. Those two are showing the same data, but when you glance at them, you immediately get feel something very different, right? The one on the left there, it's like, okay, yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. Blue's a little bit taller. And you look at the one on the right, and the blue is important. It's significant. It stands out. So depending on, well, back to that situation, the company you're in is debating a big change, and you're presenting data at a meeting where a bunch of the managers are actually going to make their decision on it. And if you want them to accept, if the data supports what you're saying, you would probably choose the good one. If it supports the decision you want them to make, you would just show that and make it really stand out. But if the data doesn't necessarily support what you're saying, you use the chart on the left and then it blends in and it doesn't seem. The same results are there. There's no falsity there. It just gives a different impression to people. And then things like I mentioned, if you know the meeting happens at 11:30, right before lunch, everybody's going to be hungry. You can use colors like red and yellow to get even more effect like that. Or use colors that people wouldn't like. Or sometimes if you really don't want people to see what it is, that's when you just present the data itself. Right? Nobody's gonna, if you take a picture of the spreadsheet and put that in your slide deck, when you're up there giving a presentation, nobody's gonna read that. I'm like, oh, wow, there's a bunch of numbers in that spreadsheet. And then stop paying attention to it immediately. Different views, the cluttered, I guess all these examples at the top are showing clutter. You know, do you want to make it stand out from the clutter, or do you want to bury it in the clutter? Putting too much on a pie chart can make a big difference too. Do they have a donut chart? No. I'll draw it on here. I got my pen. Does everybody know the difference between a pie chart and a donut chart? I'll draw it in. I guess I have to draw it in white. So if we take out this middle part, wait, can I just draw a circle? That would probably be better than scribbling. Yes, full circle. Oops. If we take out that middle part, it's a donut chart. But do you see how that immediately looks a lot less cluttered than having the points there? There comes a point where if there's so many wedges in your pie, you really want to cut out that middle because all those little points blend together no matter what's going on. But cutting out that middle makes a big difference on how people perceive it. Doesn't change the data that's being presented. It just impacts human perception. The bar charts like this, the consolidated columns, right? Notice a whole bunch of them. I guess this is to make China, this chart was put out to make China emissions not seem so bad. Is that emissions? Yeah, CO2 emissions. China didn't want to seem so bad. Everybody already knows how bad American emissions are. We're like the most notorious country for CO2 emissions. And if the data says China is twice as much as ours, they don't want to seem so bad. So they list out the most famous countries in the world and then can group everybody else in the world into one chart. Then they're not the tallest bar anymore. So everything's still true in there. It just gives a false perception. What was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 countries out of however many countries are in the world. I don't know that number. How many countries are in the world? 195. So this bar is actually represents 189 different countries. They wouldn't even show up on the chart if all of them together only add up to that much. And they always give it like this, the good versus bad. Multicolored charts start to look busy, and it just depends on how you want people to perceive it. All of these are very flat colors, right? If we did something like this and then followed it up with another chart that had like those rounded off corners and looked a little, not a full 3D chart, but it added shadows and smooth corners and rounding off and things like that so that it looked a little bit 3D, people are automatically going to take better to the data presented in the second one. Orders. Yeah, pie charts should not have very many things. And whenever pie charts do start to get a lot of things, you want to cut the middle out of them and make it a donut chart instead of a pie chart. And well, you can see even with 2 things on there, it still makes not having that middle sharp point there makes a big difference. Different ones. things that aren't clear. What is the problem with this one? Too much information. Yeah. The idea of burying the data you don't want them to see. Right? Like maybe we really only care about whatever the Mississippi number is here. That's the only one that matters for what we're doing. But we go ahead and throw in the data for all the states. I pointed at Mississippi because that looked like the biggest bubble on there. We throw out the data for all the states, and then Mississippi doesn't look so bad because it just gets lost in the mess somewhere. And that, yeah, it's hard to make any sense out of that. If you want something in 3D, you should really have a 3D object. If you want to represent your data in 3 dimensions, you should probably project a hologram in 3 dimensions or make a physical model of it so people can turn it and look at it. That's actually what a bubble chart is. So a bubble chart is supposed to represent the 3rd dimension. So the bigger things are like moving towards us, which would be the positive axis, and the smaller things are moving away from us. Or typically the positive or negative axis, but those are just labels. We can change them any way we want. This is one of the most notorious tricks because nobody ever reads the axes. It looks like product 1 is way, way more than product 2. Product 2 is like almost unused, but it starts at 70 and only goes to 90 or 95. So it's not very much bigger, but because of how we set our labels, it definitely looks that way. I guess there's the full example. Yeah, time charts, things like that. There's lots of different ways, and we know it will influence people. So as far as classroom goes, just want to make sure you're aware of that. Know some of the little tips and tricks. Since we're heading into IT, everybody uses color monitors, right? So at some point, even if you don't take any psychology courses, you probably at least want to look at the basics of color theory. That's the most well-known one, but the fonts we use, straight edges, curvy lines, there's all there's shape theory as well. So the shapes have similar effects. You might want to look into some of that. It can be useful, and it goes both ways. I was just pointing out that we're well aware that that is something that happens, so be aware of it. Watch out for when other people are presenting data in a way that might be, they could be designed to influence the people seeing it, or if you ever need to, it's there. It sounds bad from everything I just said, but remember, think about it. There's lots of situations, right? Like, what if you're raising money to feed starving children, right? And you've already raised a lot of money, but in order to raise more, you might manipulate the presentation of the data just a little bit to make the situation seem worse than what it is, right? Influencing people for a good reason, but that's an ethical concern. As far as our class here, it's just be aware that it's there, watch out for it, and know that it's there if you ever need it. It's on you to make that decision. Which ties into cybersecurity. Approach it like the ethical hacking class. We're just imparting them knowledge, right? It's a school. We've here teaching you what is known about things, and what you do with that knowledge is up to you afterwards. No liability. Or I'm not liable for what you do for the thing with the knowledge. So cybersecurity, the definition, I just read that off, state of being protected against criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data or not or, and the measures taken to achieve this. Seems fairly straightforward. If you stay that for a moment, you'll notice that that's not really saying much. Just a general state, protected against criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data and the measures taken to achieve this. Start to think about it, there's a lot of vagueness in that. There's a bit that could be missing. So the formal definition doesn't fully define what cybersecurity is. Most people know what it is, or a better way to say that is most people have a preconceived notion about what cybersecurity is. That doesn't, but a lot of people have different preconceived notions about what it is, which is where problems come in because people have different expectations of what it means. I'll list this out. Basic tenet, tenets of cybersecurity. The basic tenets of cybersecurity say a whole lot more than the definition does. And yeah, an acronym you've probably encountered before. Confidential. Our data needs to be confidentiality. I'm going to write that with the adjective here because the other two words I have on the list are adjectives. Integrity. Integrity and availability. These three things: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's what cybersecurity is concerned with. And this is also where we end up with a trade-off. So CIA is a standard acronym for that. It kind of makes it easy for people to remember, but we think of this as an interconnected system, sort of a triangle. And at first I drew that as a nice equilateral triangle, but if we need to make any changes, we can't just make our data more confidential without messing the integrity or availability. If we're worried about confidentiality, we probably give up on availability. Right? Make our data more confidential. We still want it to, we still want the integrity of it. We want to make sure the data is what it's supposed to be, free from errors, flaws, things like that. But to make it more confidential, we probably have to give up some on our availability. We're going to lose availability in the, you can think of that triangle changing shape. And the area of the triangle, think of it that way. We cannot gain or lose anything from that area of the triangle. So if we want to extend one side, we have to take it away from somewhere else. Maybe like this. Try to accentuate that even more. If that picture kind of makes sense. The more we lock our data down, the more confidential it becomes, the less available it becomes. It's always a trade-off and an interesting balance, because obviously we could lock it down where nobody has access to it. Really, the only secure computer would be one locked in a vault that no human ever gets near. And that is completely secure, but we no longer have any availability whatsoever. A human cannot access the data on that computer. So it's kind of useless by the time we get to that point. Encryption and decryption. Encryption isn't just scrambling the code. We have to be able to unscramble it, because all we do if we scramble it is we lose our data and record. It's kept confidential, but we lose the integrity. Can we unscramble it and get back to the full original version, or do we lose something along the way? There are much better encryption schemes that, or not better, I should say better. There are other encryption schemes that would be harder to crack, but are they accessible? Or it's probably happened to everybody here at least once. You ever forgot a password to a site? That is definitely confidential. The integrity hasn't been compromised. It's still what it's supposed to be. But you use too good of a password to lock it down, and it's no longer available. So we always have to watch out for those things. Or really the balance between them. A good way to think about it is those three tenets, corners of a triangle, and we can stretch and twist and move that triangle around, but we can't change the area. If we take away from one side, or if we add to one side, we have to take away from another. So it's all about the balance there. And a big part of cybersecurity is education, educating people, make sure they're ready. So for the most part, it's a definitions this week. So probably a fairly short lecture, both nights, just to break up the definitions. Tonight's malware, probably not gonna read any of those. Last couple times I thought this class, when we get to the second notes, the one about cyber attacks, just break up the definitions. I would go ahead and do a couple small ones, show you how easy those are. A denial of service attack can be written in as few as 3 lines of code, but you're not going to stop it with 3 lines of code. You need way more than 3 lines of code to stop a denial of service. So see some of the easy ones. SQL injections are important as well, because only the original developer can stop a SQL injection. We'll talk about attacks on Thursday. I have 4 pages here. They're not long. It's from a little bitty notebook. I ran out of paper from the big notebook, so not a lot on each page, but four of these pieces of paper with attacks written, talking about attacks, and all of those attacks fall on the cybersecurity person except for one, and that's a SQL injection. And the original software developer is the only person that can stop the SQL injection. So that is a little bit different than the other ones, and really, to stop it, it's just a matter of not being lazy when you write your code. It doesn't add much. Oh, I forgot to ask. Is it okay if I erase the board, get into the definitions, and then we can wrap up the first half? And attacks are a little more interesting because we can pause and look at some examples of them. Not good ones. Like I'm not going to write an actual denial of service attack. When we get to the line, we'll probably just ping another server a bunch of times, which isn't going to stop it because that's one bit each. So any server can handle that. But see the concepts behind it so that you know what's involved if you're heading into cybersecurity and have to stop that, and see how much easier it is for the person creating the denial of service attack than it is for the person trying to stop it. Oh, that's Thursday. So there's a lot of things we need to look out for and really educate everybody in the company. That's what the cybersecurity person is going to do, spend most of their time doing, educating and confirming that people know this stuff. Which I can put this word up here. This is going to show up. Pen test. I know the chair of the chair here at Sellersburg is also the statewide chair for cybersecurity, and he's been wanting to move to this test instead of one of the current ones.
Secure Plus?
I think he's still going to keep Security Plus because that's part of the CompTIA triad, which may be a fourth one soon. They just created a data one, so that's probably going to work in. I've been trying to get people to get the CompTIA data one because it's brand new, so to be among the first to get it, HR departments are going to see, oh, it's a CompTIA cert. Our data people have to have this cert. So some people need to try to get a jump on it. It might give a nice little advantage for the next 2 years or so. It just came out last year. I haven't even seen the test questions on it or anything. But the Security Plus is probably going to keep. But one of the ones he's trying to replace with this, which is penetration testing. Oh yeah, it's replacing the ethical hacking one. Because the current one said ethical hacking, which they used because people didn't know what it was for. As cybersecurity has come up over the last few years, so they wanted to spell it out explicitly. But the people that do it don't really like it being called ethical hacking. So this would be the preferred term. And now that cybersecurity has been a big deal for a few years, HR departments have learned what penetration testing is. So they'll ask for pen test in the job postings instead of saying ethical hacking in the job posting.
I've always seen white hat and black hat terms used.
The certification, the certification except one of the certifications. So this is the name of an actual certification. White hat and black hat are on our list tonight, I think. Oh. At some point, I'll draw. I know I always draw pictures like the old Spy versus Spy cartoons in white and black and talk about where that came from.
I never realized that. Is that involved hacking?
What?
The two spies?
No, it was from before that.
Okay, I'm like, my brain just now clicked because I remember those cartoons.
There's
no way that involves technology. I was with the,
no, that just came because it was in an uncolored magazine.
yeah,
and they had only a few pages in Mad were ever colored, so they had to come up with two colors. Now, white hat and black hat come from old westerns in the 50s, but the idea behind it was well known by then. Might as well talk about that. I'm going to start throwing it in pictures. What else did I have a penetration test before I said? Authorized cyber attack. So that's when a company would hire you to check their security system. Like, okay, our new cybersecurity expert says he's got the system locked down. Can you confirm that? So you come in not knowing anything about their system and see if you can break in, or how long it takes you to break in. Because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Right? If you're really good at pen testing and you can break into their system, but it takes you 16 hours, that's a pretty secure system because in 16 hours, they're probably going to notice somebody trying to break in. So it's often not a question of if, because it's just a question of how long does it take and where is that threshold of where you call it secure or insecure. But that's an authorized cyber attack. And for years, especially cybersecurity first showed up on the scene, HR departments didn't know what to ask for and things like that, so they went with the descriptive certification got a lot of clout in the industry and actually called it ethical hacking. But now that it's been around a while, penetration testing is the preferred terminology for it. To evaluate systems, or if you're the cybersecurity person, after you set it up, can you break into it yourself? Obviously you can if you're the one that set it up, but how long does it take you? How difficult is it? Things like that. Usually best with outsiders. So black hat and white hat. That's the terms we use. This has it. The terminology specifically comes from the old Wild West movies, particularly the 50s. The era when Ronald Reagan was an actor. Ronald Reagan's heyday in Hollywood, long before his political career. John Wayne's early days, those sort of westerns. So it was well known by then, but well, this is blue, but the point's still there. In those westerns, the bad guy always wore a black hat, and the good guy always wore a white cowboy hat. It doesn't even have to go that far. It doesn't necessarily have to be black and white. The bad guys would wear a darker colored hat than the good guys. It started getting away from the black and white, and even when we got into realism, like late 60s westerns, and people were like, okay, yeah, nobody riding from Kansas to California on a horse is still going to have a white hat when they get to California. It's going to be brown. So, but tints are brown. The bad guys would wear darker hats. And in Hollywood, people have used that in the storytelling. They periodically put the bad guy in a white hat, and it would throw the audience off just because of our intuition, because it's not just about Western American culture. Something about human nature that the lighter colored hat, our minds automatically associate that with the good guys in the story. But we use those terminologies. Specifically, it kind of comes out of the westerns of the 50s. The bad guys are always in the black hat, and the good guys are in the white hat. So, in particular, black hat are the malicious attackers, which that's the ones we really need to worry about. Little things can happen, right? Accidental access versus somebody going to a site and downloading the wrong CSV file, and they suddenly have access to data they're not supposed to. That's very different than somebody breaking through a bunch of firewalls and tracking down a CSV that they're not supposed to see and downloading it. But the malicious intent is what's affiliated there. And penetration testing is over in white hat. You're doing the same thing, breaking through the security system, but you're doing it to test how secure it is, to look for holes so that you can seal them up. You're not breaking through to steal people's data and stuff like that. Especially on Thursday, those little stick men are going to show up in a whole lot of the things we talk about. Okay, let's start with malware. Things we need to worry about in cybersecurity. First one, malware, which stands for malicious software. So software that is written intentionally to harm a person's computer, to lock it down, prevent them from doing anything. Some sort of malicious intent to it. There's lots of different types. The most famous one, probably a virus. Most famous as far as what people talk about, because it's not that high on the list of ones that actually exist. It's pretty low on the ones that actually exist. It's just for about a 25-year span, anytime something would go wrong with the computer, people would say it's a virus. If it wasn't acting like what they expected it to do, they would say it's a virus. And usually in their case, it wasn't a virus, it was human error. They would just say stuff. I remember one example, somebody called me up, she was having trouble with her computer, and she was certain that it picked up a virus, and she was panicking, and she couldn't get to her games. So if you weren't aware, I think everybody's aware of this, right? Video games are addictive. So when you physically can't get to your video game, and it is an addiction, it's withdrawal. It's not withdrawal like some things, but you do hit the withdrawal symptoms. I think everybody's aware of that. It's a legal addictive product, makes it a great industry to get into. People will buy whatever you sell. But that's a different point. But she couldn't get to her games. So she was panicking a little, and she was certain that there was a virus. She couldn't figure out what was going on. She couldn't get past this pop-up that just kept popping up. I was like, yeah, I can take a look. So I went over there and looked at the pop-up that was on there, and it said, Windows 8 needs to update, or needs to restart to finish installing some important updates. So I clicked OK, and it restarted. She was panicking, saying that her computer had a virus. And apparently she never bothered to read the message on that pop-up. She tried every possible thing she could think of except reading the message and hitting the OK button. I clicked the OK button, and about a minute and a half later, her computer had restarted and worked perfectly. But people would just use the word virus. But a virus is something specific. I'll write it down and then say it. Attacks a computer. So a virus very specifically carries out an attack by inserting its own code into other software. Most often a copy of itself. So once you have a virus, that virus goes to every DLL. That's the compiled version of all the libraries and that the computer knows about. Goes to every DLL and just inserts itself in the middle of that. So then whenever other software runs, it's going to pull from a library, and instead of pulling the thing, running the part that it thinks it's running, like the color that a button on a GUI is supposed to be, it actually launches a copy of the virus. So very specific thing. Probably the most talked about one, but as far as actually existing, one of the rarest ones. People just kept using that term. Like, computer has a virus, computer has a virus. Very few of the people that said that actually had a computer that had a virus. They just heard the word and thought about that. Some of them might have had worms. That's the one that they didn't say as often, but were more likely to have on their computer. That's self-replicating software. That attempts to spread. So yeah, those pop-up boxes from your antivirus software, or that want you to install an antivirus software or come back to one that's expired and you're not going to use anymore. The little notifications constantly pop up for years. They're technically not worms because they don't attempt to spread to other computers. Though those are the people who wrote this definition. So I think there's a little bit of wiggle room in there because it fits the rest of it. But self-replicating software, no matter how many times you try to get rid of it, it shows back up. But in the definition, it also does things to do whatever it can to get across the network and end up on another machine as well, to be a worm. More computers have worms than viruses, but people never use that word. I guess it doesn't sound as interesting or something. Trojan horse, next type of malicious software, things that were intentionally developed to harm a computer. It appears to be legitimate. Gain access. That summarizes it. Software that pretends to be something else. You think you're downloading an installer for maybe an installer to play your Steam games offline. That would be something huge. It's going to take a minute to run. But it's not really, but you find it on a third-party site where there's no fees involved or anything. Steam does charge for the offload one, doesn't it?
No.
Uh,
If the game doesn't need internet, you can just play it in offline mode.
I was trying to think of one that charges. I can't think of one that charges off the top of my head. But yeah, something, download the game and download the stuff to play the game offline. Maybe it's a big game, so something hard to get. Or an early release. One of the annual EA ones that comes out on the sports games, you want to get it a few weeks before your friends. And you find a pirated site, think you're downloading it, but it's not really the game once you run it. It's something that installs, something that installs viruses, and it's really hard to get it out there. But it looks like something else while you're doing it. I mentioned size a couple times. That can be a big issue. Like if you're watching your network, I remember hearing, I was at a conference and the Cisco guy was talking, he mentioned that if you're watching your network traffic, it's often easy to spot the malicious code, especially the Trojan horses, because everything will be going by. He used the analogy from a kitchen. He said, you're watching toasters go by and suddenly you see a refrigerator. It stands out. It's like there's toaster, coaster, coaster, coaster. What's that fridge doing here? It's like out of nowhere. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the stuff. And he was getting into things that they don't, and it got technical afterwards. He was talking about how it didn't follow the regular OSI model. So you have the nice organization and then something that doesn't fit into that model that we briefly mentioned last week, and you all will see in your networking class, because everybody has taken networking class. But the things stand out. Trojan horses are really bad about that, but a lot of malware, it stands out if you're watching for it. Spyware. This one has a lot of wiggle room in the definition or interpretations of the definition. The definition is very definitive about what it is. Just some large companies will, I guess they hire people that are really, really good at talking to argue that their stuff's not spyware, but collects info and data about the user. Takes info and data about user. And I guess the general argument is the malware version does it without your permission. You didn't check the box on the README that said it was okay for them to do that. Right. Those long, lengthy user agreements, 55 pages in, there's some 6-point font that says they're going to do that. And then they collect all their information, and technically it's not spyware anymore because you did check the box agreeing to let them do that. So when it's put on there for a malicious intent, usually if we say spyware explicitly, we're talking about things like password, something that's watching your keystroke logger to catch your password. So instead of cracking the password, we're just going to watch every keystroke you make. And after the power button's pressed, it won't be very long until the password combination shows up. And then there's a pause and key presses while everything boots up. So that's usually what we're thinking about when we're talking about spyware. But there's other ones, which I guess flows right into the next one on the list, keylogger. Track everything that a user does on a computer. So super boosted spyware. So instead of looking for something and hiding subtly in the background and that long list that Task Manager pulls up all the processes that are running, it's somewhere in that list with a fake name, really small and goes unnoticed because it's looking for something in specific. Keylogger is much larger, and it's just going to keep track of everything that happens on the computer. Every key press, every mouse position, everything that comes in the microphone, the camera, everything that goes out the speakers, on the monitor, everything that's plugged up or connected wirelessly. It tracks every single thing. Not just the keys, but obviously those have been around since the only input to the machine was the keyboard. So they're not new things. So they kept that name because to list out everything would be too much. But it's a super pumped up spyware. It monitors everything, not just looking for something specific. And there's more. That's the most common and the most well-known ones. And catchy names. A big part of cybersecurity is education. And if you go out and start educating your coworkers there at a company where you're the cybersecurity expert and get into every single technical term and stuff, they're going to stop listening pretty quick. So you most likely want to use the short list of the scary sounding ones, right? Virus and worms, spyware. Most people in the world know what a Trojan horse is. They know that is a direct attack that's hard to stop. Keylogger, I guess that kind of fits on the list too. It's not a big word, but people know what it means. It's like, oh, it's going to keep track of every key press on the computer. Yeah, the computer already does that on its own. So that's actually software that just accesses that file. But yes, it sounds scary. It's a nice scary thing to put on the short list of malware when you're educating your coworkers, because if you get into the technical details, they're going to stop listening to you, and the things aren't going to sound as bad if you give it like the alphanumeric name codes and stuff. Because fear works. If you're a cybersecurity expert trying to educate your coworkers, you want to scare them into keeping their computer secure, because not much else is going to work. Otherwise, they're going to feel inconvenienced. They're going to be furious and come at you with a whole lot of aggression whenever their phone battery's dead and they can't access the multi-factor authentication. Does everybody experience that at least once in their life? It's so common now. Maybe your phone left phone in the car and can't get a computer. When I was going to IUS and finishing up getting my bachelor's degree in mathematics, I was over there when they implemented the multi-factor authentication required for everybody, every access everywhere. They did it in the middle of the semester, and It was a mess for a little while. The number of people that left their phones in the dorm room because they'd already been in trouble for having the phone in the classroom a few times. All the teachers that had policies of absolutely no phones in the class, and then suddenly couldn't get on the computer without a phone. Back to that trade-off. We have to, there's a trade-off. That's an inconvenient thing that most people are gonna have to deal with at some point in their life. Forget to tell the bank you changed your phone number. So then whenever you do need to actually get that code sent to you to get back to your bank account, they send it to your old phone number. Those sort of things happen, but that trade-off. A list of the big ones, the short list of the scary sounding ones. So your cybersecurity expert educating your coworkers. Talk about the scary ones, not the technical sounding ones, because they're going to stop listening immediately. Make it like a ghost story that catches humans' attention somewhere instinctually. Any questions about those? It's all definitions tonight, so probably seems like a good time to take a break. There's not a whole lot left. Then we get through some of the most important ones. Just one more page, but we just went through a whole bunch of definitions. So a quick break sound good to everybody? 10 minutes. I don't hear anybody saying no. And I'm getting really thirsty after an hour straight of talking. So my laptop says it's 7:06, so we will get back to it at 7:16. I'll see you in just a minute. And then next up is scams. Another one on the educate your coworkers list.